Well, it's been the worst kept secret within the music industry. However, we have it now at last. That's right, the Mars Volta have their new album out on all streaming services, and it will perhaps be one of the most confusing releases of the year. On the Mars Volta's newest album, how do I pronounce this? Lucro Sucio, Los Ojos del Vacío. I absolutely butchered that pronunciation, but I don't care. From having this album leaked online to giving away physical copies to fans months before the album's actual release date, and even performing the album live in its entirety on the tour alongside with Deftones, then it seems every man and their dog has managed to listen to this record before I have. Still, I held out until the record was eventually released, but in the meantime I decided to do a bit of a deep dive, going back and listening to their entire catalogue in reverse order, even listening to their old At the Drive-In records, which, oh, I gotta say, holy shit, they were amazing back in the day. There was some old footage of At the Drive-In I was watching at a big day out back in 2001, which is just pure ecstasy to watch. Seriously, go check that out. That unreverberated energy is just unmatched. Moving to the present, and maybe this new marketing strategy is a genius move that we are yet to comprehend. But I guess time will tell if this is the case of a 4D chess move, or just bailing on a big combo move like you do in Tony Hawk's. So, as to be expected, this album is a stark comparison to the Mars Volta's early works, of course. In fact, it begins off with The End, a short track called Finn, with mostly these vocal harmonies, and sets us up for what we are about to hear before we go into an electronic sound affair with Reina Tormenta. And I'm not going to lie, I actually thought that we were going to do a deep dive into electronic rock territory, which kinda scared the shit out of me for a minute. I wasn't quite sure how I'd feel about that coming out of the Mars Volta. Well, I guess you could expect it if it was a side project they have, but just not this band. One of the more intriguing aspects about this album is how it kind of feels like an amalgamation of one giant song, split up into several pieces on this record. I say this because the transitions between the pieces are elongated and almost overlapping one another. The record is very prog heavy, but not really the traditional prog rock that you would expect from the past. Instead, it lends itself into a experimental sound field almost akin to a soundtrack for a movie that we haven't yet seen, or perhaps we are meant to visualize it in our minds. I mean, hell, Where's Borland did this for a solo album, and that was actually really cool, so maybe the Mars Volta can do it too. Coming back to this record, however, it just gels together so it sounds a bit like an amalgamation of one song, which is interesting, I guess, if you are playing it from start to finish. However, if you want to pick a standout track like this for a review, then it would leave you scratching your head. At the risk of sounding a bit pretentious here, the effort does sound like an experience to be consumed in its entirety, rather than a few songs on a playlist here and there. While the music doesn't exactly lend itself into the realms of background noise, it does ever so slightly lean into this. It's not lounge music, but it's not far from it. Synth sections can be heard on here, along with smooth bass lines and extremely minimal guitar work, and not to mention there is only one energy found on this record.
Calm blue ocean, calm blue ocean, calm blue ocean.
The one thing I did note when listening to the Mars Volta's previous records, which was a major talking point in my 5-minute review for the 2022 self-titled album, was just how different it sounded retrospectively to their older material. But I jumped to that conclusion I made a few years ago back in the day. You see, if you manage to listen to all their albums leading up until this new effort, then you come to the realization that the groundwork has been building ever so slowly over the years, and in all honesty, with hindsight as well as my guide, this transition was not only natural, but inevitable. The musicians are no longer 20-something-year-olds hyped up on God knows what jumping around on stage. Instead, our musicians are in their 40s who have adjusted to their musical taste over time, and this album is a reflection into their mindset. And this just happens over time with all of us. I guess I'm still perplexed by this effort, maybe confounded in some areas, because I was holding on to hope that there might be at least one semi-energetic track on here to be found. However, this is not the case. This makes it very difficult to decipher to some degree, as it all becomes somewhat indistinguishable, and even talking about it on this kind of review, the message may not come across as clearly as I hope. What little insight I can provide on the album is regarding the title Lucro Sucio, or however you pronounce it, which can mean dirty profit, and I think it was used as a slogan against a politician possibly in Puerto Rico, but I can't remember where I read it and I can't find that link anymore. Regardless, we also should take a moment to discuss that album cover, because this has to be one of the worst artworks I've seen in a number of years. It's like the band are just pushing back completely completely against the AI artwork movement, and just giving the big middle finger to all artists in general. But I've heard people describing it as almost moon-like given the texture on hand, and of course with that shape found within the middle. Instead, I'm just going to call it out for what it is. The band clearly just walked onto a construction site and started taking photos of some drywall. It is a dull album to look at, and I'm guessing many will say it is a perfect representation of the music found within the record as well. Now, I posted a short some time back mentioning that they will be performing this album in full at their concerts, and gradually over time, people who had attended these concerts would leave a comment and mention what they thought of this album. The vast majority seemed to say that it was a good effort, with a few people stating it was okay. Perhaps they were in a state of bewilderment, I guess. And even less were saying that it was a terrible effort. But never once did I see anyone comment and say this was a truly amazing album. And after listening to this album myself, I have to agree with, well, the majority. I would say that it's certainly an intriguing effort that is pretty good, but it's not amazing, and it's certainly not a horrendous effort. But at the end of the day, I don't know what to make of it. Overall, I'm going to give this album a score of, I guess, 6 million chilies on the spicy scale. But that could vary from month to month the more I start to listen to this album. And also, with my favourite tracks, they're just too difficult to pinpoint or narrow down, so I'm not going to pick one or another. Nothing on this album stands out above any other songs, but nothing really stands beneath any others as well. I guess how you ultimately feel about this album is dependent on how you felt about their previous record, because it seems to continue in that journey down that path of musical evolution. It was vastly different to what I was expecting, and I kind of was anticipating an experimental sounding record that would have string sections and a lot more electronic influences. So I'm pretty glad that this wasn't the case to a degree, because I would have hated it. The only thing that I have to wonder is, will we get an acoustic rendition of this album a few months later down the track, like what they did with their self-titled album? I guess the future will tell in that regards. Ultimately though, I guess even with expectations for the inevitable changes, it still comes across as a surprise, and I'm sure this will be a hotly debated album by the fans for the remainder of the year. Anyway, make sure to listen to this album for yourself. As always, make sure to comment below with your thoughts on this album or your favourite track. As always, stay spicy out there, everyone. If you've enjoyed this content, make sure to smash that like button, subscribe to us, and stay notified for future music related content, because it keeps our manager happy at the end of the day. We are also on Discord, Instagram, Facebook, and all those other social platforms if you want to check us out. As always, people, you have a great day and stay spicy.